partying, clearly. I want to give myself time to do the subject justice, so there won't be one at the beginning of January, but I promise you February's is going to be worth waiting for.
And meanwhile, you might listen tonight, you might win an appointed a pub quiz over Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely. And just about, I've put my email address up on the monthly history talk bit, so if honestly, Oldham related, non-Oldham related, if there's anything to do with history you would like me to do a talk on, I'm all ears. You know, it's your history talks, so, you know, there's a burning passion for the greater points of Persian carpets from 3 BC or something. I mean, whatever it is, you know, Persian carpets are brilliant. I will do a talk on it, okay?
Thanks, Kelly.
However, tonight is all things Christmas. So this is the first of the talks that's not specifically Oldham or Bardsley related, but there is an Oldham and a Manchester connection to segments. What I've done, it's split into different parts. Still haven't bought that pointer.
Yeah, I've just remembered that.
So these are what I'm going to be going through. So starting with why we celebrate Christmas on December the 25th. What's Christmas without a smooch? What do you think that's about? Pair of Christmas crowns. Anyone fancy a game of football? Christmas trees. A little bit too much celebrating. What can go horribly wrong? And then the Manchester Christmas Blitz and the Oldham Christmas Eve bomb. We wish you a Merry Christmas, and then the main man himself, okay? And as I said, because I started with a list of Christmas, just all the Christmas bits and pieces, and I did my research on all of them, and I'm there like, yeah, people don't want me to talk for 3 days, so I've condensed it down, and hopefully these will be ones that you enjoy, and give you a flavour, a Christmas flavour of all things Christmas. And if there is anything that I'm going through and I'm talking about, I keep saying this, but you think, that sounds interesting, I'd like to know a bit more about that, let me know, and I'll happily do a talk on it. Unless it's about Christmas trees, because I've probably done everything you need to know about Christmas trees in this month's talk. Okay. So, first, why do we celebrate Christmas on December the 25th? So, I mean, we all know that's when we celebrate it, although not all Christians celebrate Christmas on December the 25th, and I will come back to that, okay? But does anybody know when this date was first used to celebrate Christmas? No? Okay. Luckily I do. I'll tell you. I'll also tell you why. So, Christmas is about celebrating the birth of Jesus. We all know that much, but we don't actually know when Jesus was born. There is no record anywhere that's been discovered yet that says when Jesus was actually born. Some scholars actually believe he was born at Easter, or what we now celebrate as Easter, but that's absolutely not what tonight's talk is about. So, why December the 25th? So it was actually already a special feast day to the Romans, okay? It was their festival called Saturnalia, which was dedicated to their god Saturn. And during this period, people ate too much, drank too much, partied, exchanged presents, all sounding very familiar, really. This is not obviously a photo, but I thought it just gave an impression of what the Saturnalian festivities might look like. So this was, the highlight of this festival was December the 25th. And so basically, in 313 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine accepted Christianity for himself. Prior to that, they were pagans and they celebrated obviously the pantheon of Roman gods. But he accepted Christianity himself, and 10 years later in 323 AD, he said, everyone is now going to be Christian. It was the formalised religion of the Roman Empire. And so in 336, it was Constantine that kind of hijacked Saturnalia and chose the 25th of December as the official Christmas celebration. Probably politically motivated, it weakens the pagans, strengthens Christianity, and what better way really than using one of the key pagan festival dates and switching it to Christmas. And the word Christmas itself, incidentally, was first mentioned in written English in 1038. Obviously, Christmas was celebrated prior to that, but it was actually more commonly known as a midwinter celebration. Yule, much earlier, but in the intervening years, usually referred to as midwinter. And so I said, we celebrate on December the 25th, and there were some nodding heads at the back when I said not everybody. And to this day, Orthodox Christian, mainly in Eastern Europe, still follow the Julian calendar. I think I heard mention of a calendar over there, not the Gregorian one that we all follow nowadays. So this means they actually celebrate Christmas on a different date. A little bit of background. Orthodox Christians broke away from Western Christianity in 1054 due to religious and political differences. And then at that time, everyone followed the Julian calendar, but in 1582, Pope Gregory, basically they noticed a mistake, which I just find mind-blowing when I tell you what the mistake was. And so he introduced the Gregorian one, but Orthodox Christians, because of these political and religious differences, refused to accept it, so they continue to follow the Julian calendar, so they celebrate Christmas on the 7th of January instead, to this date. And so the error in the Julian calendar, and I've tried to memorise this, but it meant, so basically, the Julian calendar did not correctly reflect the actual time it takes the Earth to circle once around the Sun, which meant that every year Easter was incorrectly calculated. I'm just like, what? I couldn't do that now if you gave me every computer in the world, but they did that, and so they introduced a Gregorian one to fix that problem instead. And so that is why December the 25th for the bulk of Christians.
Is that relating to, the leap years, nominally every 4 years, but not every 400 years unless it's 1,000?
Yeah, I'm a historian. I'm going to nod and say yes, because that sounds like it should be right actually, because it was to fix the calculation of the orbit, so yeah.
Well, a year is 11 minutes 14 seconds less than 365 and a quarter.
Nathan, shut up.
No, that's not. That's really interesting. Love it. But that's what they were working out in the 1500s, and I'm just like, like I say, I'm a...
This is much later, this is early 1900s.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, so what I'm taking from that is I'm right. Yeah. Okay, about, yeah. So, that's why we celebrate Christmas. But really like that, love that kind of thing. Okay, so moving on to, what's Christmas without a smooch? Eh? Everyone puckering up under the mistletoe, come in. Let's have a festive welcome. But why? Why do we kiss under the mistletoe? When did it start? It's a rather quaint little practice, but it actually has a vaguely gruesome history behind it. So, but just to set the scene, the practice of hanging mistletoe, and there's a lot of mention of Druids in this talk, an awful lot of it does go back quite some time. But the Druids in Iron Age Britain, which was roughly 800 BC to when the civilising Romans came in AD 43, they loved mistletoe. Okay, they absolutely did. Because it blooms right throughout winter and it doesn't wither and die, it became a really sacred symbol of fertility in all animals. And Druids believed if you made it into a drink, it would help with any fertility problems, not just for humans, but any animal that was to drink it. They also believed that mistletoe could heal illnesses, protect against nightmares, protect against evil spirits, bring good luck, and predict the future. So pretty impressive stuff. And it wasn't just the Druids. Greeks, Romans, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, they also believed it could cure epilepsy, could help with spleen disorders, ulcers, and protect you from any harm by poisoning. So it is imbued with real serious powers. And the Romans also saw mistletoe as a symbol of fertility, and they actually used it in lots of their ceremonies, including Saturnalia, and they also used it in marriage ceremonies. So it's been around or seen as something really important, sacred, for a very, very long time. But it wasn't until the mid-18th century that it became associated with, well, snogging, really. And maybe it's because kissing first stage of courtship leads to marriage, leads to maybe fertility. Maybe it's something sensible like that. I prefer another reason, which goes back to Norse mythology. Okay? So, the Norse goddess of love was called Frigg, and she had a son called Baldus. And back in the early days, before men and women were on the earth, there was a prophecy that Baldus was going to die. And Frigg obviously didn't want this to happen. So she went to all the animals and plants on earth and asked them, please don't kill my son. And they all said, not a problem, Frigg, won't do it, we will not harm your son. But she forgot to ask mistletoe. So Loki, the goddess of mischief, he made a bow and arrow from mistletoe, shot it at Baldus and killed him. In most versions of the story, Baldus does remain very, very dead. And Frigg's not a very happy, bereaved mother. However, the version I like, and this is a true version, was that the other gods resurrected Baldus. And because Frigg was so delighted with this, she declared mistletoe a symbol of love and vowed to kiss anybody who walked underneath it. So it's a very ancient Norse story. And so the earliest reference found to kissing under mistletoe is found in a song from 1784. And there's a verse that reads, what all the men, Jem, John and Joe cry, what good luck has sent you, and kiss beneath the mistletoe a girl not turned 20. But that's the first written reference to it. Dickens also mentioned it in his book The Pickwick Papers in 1837, and he describes women who find themselves under the mistletoe. They found it useless to resist any longer and submitted to be kissed with good grace. Yeah, found themselves nearby, loitering right next to it as the Duke of Devonshire walks past, no doubt. And in the early 19th century, the practice was to remove a berry from the sprig that you were kissing under every time a kiss was given out. And when all the berries were picked, that was it, kissing privileges finished. And folklore at the time also said that any single girl who did not get a kiss under the mistletoe would remain unwed for the following year. So again, good reason to be. Me, just what a coincidence, there's the mistletoe, didn't even see it. Tradition also stated that men were the ones who did the kissing, ladies could not instigate kissing, and it was only on the cheek, according to tradition. And as a last note, remember all those health benefits that I mentioned, that the Druids felt it would prevent this, and the Romans felt it could protect against that. If you eat the berries of mistletoe, it can cause vomiting, stomach pains, and death. So please stick to just kissing under it. Okay? Yeah, I don't want any on my conscience. Okay? When Kelly said it was really good for the spleen, yeah, I'm not saying that. Okay? Just that they believed it. Okay. So like I say, it is kind of a whistle-top tour because there's lots that I wanted to include, but any burning questions about mistletoe, see me afterwards. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a pair of Christmas crowns. So in medieval times, being crowned king, or queen, but more commonly king, was, in capital letters, a very big deal. It wasn't actually enough to be declared king. You could take the throne and say, I am now the king, but it was actually the act of coronation that made you the monarch. Without it, you could be challenged, but afterwards, especially in early medieval times, even if they thought you were the biggest on earth, they weren't going to challenge you because you had been divinely anointed. It was a really, really big deal. And so to make coronation even more special, two medieval rulers chose to be crowned on Christmas Day, and that's what I'm going to tell you about. So this gentleman on the left is called Charlemagne, and this gentleman, on your left, my right, this is William the Conqueror. So they both chose to be crowned on Christmas Day. So Charlemagne, I don't know how familiar you may be with him, he wasn't a king of Britain or England, but he was actually known as the father of Europe, for a very good reason, because basically he ruled most of Western Europe. Okay, he was crowned on Christmas Day in 800 AD. He actually ruled from 768 to 841 AD. Incredibly, he was very young. Well, he was in his early 20s when he actually became king of the Franks. So the Franks, that was a Germanic tribe, and when I say he ruled most of Western Europe, the Franks were in present-day Belgium, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Germany. So a massive area that he ruled as the king of the Franks. His father was called Pepin the Short. And when he died, the kingdom was actually split between Charlemagne and his brother Carloman. But his brother very conveniently died a couple of years later. I'm not saying now, I'm not pointing fingers, but you know, back in those days. So it all fell to Charlemagne. And he married several times and had 18 children. I'm going to give you a fun fact, okay? Anyone alive today with European heritage is descended from Charlemagne. That was proven in a scientific study in 2013. So if anyone ever tries to impress you by giving it descended from Charlemagne, you can absolutely reply, me too. Okay? They did it. And I see it sometimes on these history groups that I'm a member of, and they're like, oh, I'm descended from Charlemagne. Everyone's like, oh, we all are. If you've got European heritage, because he was the father of Europe, I think figuratively and literally, by the amount of kids he had. And so he was actually, so he was crowned king of the Franks in 768, but it was in 800 AD he was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor. And this was a massive empire. It was like, it wasn't like one country, it was loads of separate countries, but they were all basically joined together by common laws and policies, and he was the ultimate head of it. They were called holy because they were Christian, and because they felt themselves descended from the original Roman Empire. It was kind of rebranded at that period in medieval times. And he was, Charlemagne, very firmly, devoutly Christian, and so he chose Christmas Day as a really significant day to have his coronation. Like I said, you could be king, you could be emperor, but until you actually had the coronation ceremony with the crown put on your head, it didn't count. And he was like, well, what better day than Christmas, because it was so important. And as far as we know, there was no drama surrounding his coronation. It was all very straightforward, which wasn't the case for William the Conqueror. Plenty of drama. So William the Conqueror, he was the Norman Duke who, October 14th, 1066, came over, thrashed the English, became king, added that to his other title of Duke of Normandy. Now 1066 is quite a year for the English, because that was the year there were 3 kings. So you had Edward Confessor, who died on January the 5th, and he had no offspring. And so Harold Godwinson, it was, I mustn't go off on a tangent because I just find it so fascinating, but he was basically, I'll be king next, and he became king. So he was the one that was defeated in October, and then William the Conqueror says, actually, I'm king. And William, I'm sure, was very pious, but he didn't choose Christmas Day because of any particular piety. It was basically from October the 16th to December 25th, it was like the nearest and best date for him to really quickly get that ceremony over and get the crown on his head. England's had 3 kings this year. He does not want to risk there being a 4th, because there were other challengers in Norway, for example, saying, actually, I should be king. It was a very turbulent time. So the ceremony, it was held at Westminster Abbey. It wasn't quite as straightforward as planned. So he's Norman. He's brought all his Norman buddies over with him, and they're having this wonderful coronation and this party. But obviously the English are a bit like, not too sure about this. So we posted guards all around the Abbey just to make sure this pesky English didn't, get a bit uppity or cause any problems. And it's all going absolutely fine, but when he was formally declared king inside the Abbey, there were lots of shouts of acclaim as people, yay, William's the king, brilliant, God bless, long live the king, and all that. And the guards who were posted outside, they'd not been to a crowning ever before, so they became alarmed. They thought there was a riot starting, and this is fact. They decided the best course of action was to set fire to lots of nearby buildings. As you do. I think there's a riot in there, let's torch that house. That is pretty much what happened. So people panicked, rioting did start to break out, smoke completely starts to fill the Abbey, but William insisted, he's like, because people are like, well, let's go out and see what's happening. He was like, no, crown, head now, anoint me. He made them complete the ceremony because of the importance of it. Yeah, so he wanted to make sure that was carried out, people are writing outside, and it didn't leave the best taste in the mouth of anybody Norman or English, and incidentally, immediately after, at the very beginning of 1067, the Tower of London was built, just to keep those pesky Londoners in their place. So, you know, but I just like, but it's fact, it's documented. There's a riot going on, what shall we do? Let's burn stuff. Honestly, you couldn't make it up. So we move on to a Christmas miracle. Oh. Okay, the right bit of paper.
Yeah.
So, have you heard of the Christmas football game that spontaneously broke out on Christmas Day in World War I?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is a lovely story. And it's fact, I'm not about to, break your hearts by saying it didn't happen. It did. But there was more than one. There wasn't just one football game that took place. There were actually quite a few. So Christmas along the Western Front in 1914 was a bit of a strange one, because remember, everyone's been told we'll all be home by Christmas, and yet you're not. You're sat in this damp bunker in the middle of somewhere in Europe in combat at what's supposed to be a very special time of the year. And it was felt by both sides, you know, it was felt by all sides over Christmas 1914. And all along the Western Front, there were spontaneous truces, okay, at various parts. In many places, this started with a ceasefire at midday on Christmas Eve. And bear in mind that armies were often only maybe 200, 300 yards apart, so they can certainly hear each other, even if they can't see each other, you know, in their bunkers. And they could hear the other side singing Christmas carols. And what appears to have happened in typical soldier fashion, they'd start being rude to each other, exchanging insults. But then actually it turned to humour and turned to Christmas greetings, and it was a proper Christmas truce, and it happened at quite a few places. And it wasn't just English and German, there were reports also of Belgian and French troops having the same Christmas truces. And presents were exchanged, cigarettes swapped, and very poignantly, the truces meant that each side could recover their dead from the intervening no man's lands. And there were various football matches documented. So the 1st Royal Battalion of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, they played against the German Battalion 371 on Christmas Day 1914. The Germans won, 2-1. Typical. And a report by Lieutenant Kurt Zemisch of 134th Saxon Infantry Regiment talked about this, and talked about how the English emerged from their trenches with the football. Oi, oi, lads, should we have a game? And he said a lively game took place, and he reflected how marvellously wonderful, yet how strange it was. You know? Yeah. And we don't know how many truces or football matches took place, because they were on a small scale, they were haphazard, and crucially, completely unauthorised. May come as no surprise to hear that the top brass were horrified by these Christmas truces, by these football matches. This fraternisation was absolutely not something they wanted to encourage, and some soldiers were punished for taking part in these truces and football matches, and the top commanders issued specific orders to make sure this never ever happened again. And for the rest of World War I, there are absolutely no reports of any Christmas truces. Not to say they didn't happen, but there are absolutely none recorded, because there had been a ban put on these taking place. And so Allied units were instead encouraged to raid, to harass the enemy, and communication with them was strictly forbidden. And it wasn't just the English commanders that wanted to stamp it out. In December 1915, a German general order forbade fraternisation with the enemy, and a specific warning that any German soldier approaching the enemy over Christmas would be charged with treason. So they did not want this happening. But just as a final note, in 2014, on the 100th anniversary of that documented football match, a football game took place at the Electrical Services Stadium in England. Anyone know who that's the home ground of? Aldershot FC. And it was named as the Game of Truce, and it was played between the British Army and German Army to commemorate that game. England won. 1-0 to England, have that. So it is a lovely story, it is a true story, but what I particularly like is that it wasn't just one football match, there were so many of these that took place and both sides really enjoyed it. But of course, top brass, doing that again. Typical. Okay, so moving on to Christmas trees. Why do we have those? So just as mistletoe became seen as a symbol of fertility because it bloomed all throughout the harshness of winter, Christmas trees, evergreens, they've also been viewed as symbols of eternal life for thousands of years. Ancient Chinese, Egyptians, obviously Druids, they were like, yes, we like these and we'll worship these as well, thank you very much. So they've been used, Christmas trees, the evergreens, the branches, they've been used by pagans to celebrate winter festivals for thousands of years. And on the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year, branches were used to decorate houses, particularly the entrance of the house. And there's a long-held Scandinavian tradition to this day that you decorate your house with evergreen on New Year's Eve to keep the devil away for the following year. So, might be worth bearing that one in mind. And so the earliest form of Christmas tree, as we know it today, dates to 15th century Germany. So Protestant Christians created what they called paradise trees, and these were the evergreen trees decorated with apples to represent the Garden of Eden, hence paradise trees. And they would set them up in their homes on the 24th of December, that is the feast day of Adam and Eve. In later years, they started adding more things, wafers, biscuits, candles, and often in the same room, a German tradition was to have what was called a Christmas pyramid, and that was a triangular wooden structure that would again be decorated with candles, with Christmas figurines. There would be a star on there, and basically over the years, the two merged. So what had been on the Christmas pyramid went onto the paradise tree and became the Christmas tree. That sort of had happened by the 16th century. And then decorated Christmas trees with lights on them were an absolute staple by 19th century Germany. And do we know who introduced Christmas trees to this country?
Prince Albert.
So,
See, it wasn't Prince Albert. You're very close, okay, but it was actually Queen Charlotte, who was the German wife of George III. She is recorded as having set up a Christmas tree at Queen's Lodge in Windsor in December 1800. However, Prince Albert is credited with popularising the idea of Christmas trees. So he brought them over in 1840, and in 1848, this picture of Victoria and Albert and their children with their Christmas tree appeared in the Illustrated London News. And so people were like, wow, that's amazeballs, and the fashion massively caught on, and very quickly Christmas trees became a feature in many, well, almost every home nowadays. But it was this symbol of the royal family enjoying their Christmas tree in 1848 that absolutely popularised them and became, as we know them, decorated with figurines, with gifts, with sweets and whatnot. I would so be all over that, like, yeah, Marcus, grabbing that. Highest of fashions. Okay, so then moving on to why extending the Christmas celebrations isn't always a great idea. So we're going back to 8th, 9th century England for this one. And you probably know that Viking raiders started coming over to England. I keep saying England, it wasn't technically England then, and I'll come back to that in a second actually. But they kept coming over to this country, starting from the 8th century, to raid, because we were a very, very wealthy country, and they particularly targeted like monasteries and churches and religious houses, because they were super wealthy, and they had the added bonus of having lots of lovely gold and silver things that were small, that you could stick them under your arm and run back to your ship with them. Very easy to rob. And at this time, the island of Britain was split into many different independent kingdoms. So where we are now, we are in the Kingdom of Mercia, just as an example. Excuse me. And I mean, that's something I would love to give a talk on, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. I promise you it's really interesting soon. If anybody wants to email me, that would be amazing. But by the late 9th century, the Vikings had pretty much overrun the whole of England, and there was only one kingdom that was independent, and that's the Kingdom of Wessex in the south. Okay? And so the King of Wessex, a chap called Alfred, later known as Alfred the Great, he was just in this constant war, and at this time, so there was like the Viking horde, the Viking marauders, the Great Heathen Army. The recorders having lots of different names, and the current one was head up by a Viking called Guthrum. And he and Alfred, so like I said, they'd overrun the whole of England. Every other kingdom had fallen to the Vikings. Wessex was the only one that hadn't. And, you know, Alfred's just like doing his best to keep them at bay from swallowing up his kingdom. And so they were constantly fighting, but they called a winter truce. So because the Vikings came and they would pillage and live off the land, but in the winter there's not so much for them to pillage. And so they generally would agree winter truces. Right, we'll see you in the springtime, lads, and we'll start it up again. And so Guthrum took his troops off to Gloucester for the winter, and Alfred took his household, his army, to Chippenham, where he had a royal estate. And no doubt looking forward to a lovely Christmas celebration. And at that time, Christmas, just like with the Romans, Saturnalia, involved eating, drinking. I mean, this is from the Bayeux Tapestry. I mean, they're having a pretty happening time there, quite frankly. Lots of lovely food, bit of booze, little servant to bring the wine to you. But, you know, it was very similar to what we do today. You just have lots of fun for that period of time. But the height of the celebrations at this time in England was actually the eve of Epiphany. I keep saying that wrong. Epiphany, which is the 6th of January. Now, Epiphany was also known as Three Kings Day, and it celebrates the three kings being guided by the star to Jesus in Bethlehem. So the 12 days of Christmas are between the 25th of December, when Jesus was born, to the three wise men following the star and coming to Bethlehem to see him. And like I said, that eve of Epiphany was the main event, not Christmas Day, and that was the height of Christian Christmas celebrations at this time. So many of Alfred's force had actually gone home for Christmas because we've got this truce, okay? We're all doing well. They would thus be unprepared if the Vikings did decide to attack, but we've got this truce, so it's all going to be fine. But Guthrum wasn't head of the Vikings because he was stupid. And he knew as Christians they would be celebrating, and he knew as English they'd probably be drinking too much, you know, I'm just saying. And so he thought, they're probably not wondering or spending too much time thinking about what I'm up to in Gloucester. And he was right, they weren't. So Guthrum took his men to Chippenham and attacked. They attacked on the eve of Epiphany, the height of the celebrations, decimated Alfred's army. Alfred was genuinely lucky to escape with his life, and after this defeat, he took what remnants of his army he had, and they retreated to an island of Athelney in Somerset. Athelney still exists. It's not an island anymore. It's very wet, very marshy still. But that's where he went to kind of regroup, and it was during this time he did a bit of wandering and soul searching with Alfred. The story of them burning the cakes. Yeah? But that's when this happens, when he's in the wilderness in Somerset wondering what to do. But he did gather a force, and in May, only a few months later, he famously defeated Guthrum at the Battle of Edington. And, you know, many historians actually see Edington rather than Hastings as the turning point for English history, but that's a story for another day. And slight irony, the peace process afterwards involved Guthrum becoming Christian. He and his leading men had to convert to Christianity. And do you know what? Guthrum, he did it. He took the name Ethelred and lived the rest of his life as a pretty devout Christian. And I figured he probably thought, well, you know what, if you can't beat him, join him. Because to go from decimation and 5 months later to have sufficient force to be able to actually kick the proverbial butt of the Vikings was pretty good going. And so Charlemagne, as I said, he's referred to as known as the father of Europe. Alfred is quite often called the father of England, which isn't strictly speaking true. It's really through his son and his grandson that England as we know it came about. But you know what, I'm not going to argue with it. He was a pretty cool guy, so we'll let him off. So yes, keep an eye. If you've got a Viking hoard nearby, maybe just don't drink quite so much for quite so long. Just saying. Okay. So on a slightly more sombre note, moving on to the Manchester Christmas Blitz, which I'm sure some of you will have heard of, be aware of. So this happened in the Second World War, and it took place over 2 consecutive nights in December 1940. So on December 22nd, 1940, the Germans dropped 272 tons of bombs, and on the 23rd of December, a further 195 tons of bombs were dropped over Manchester. Manchester was targeted because it was a major centre of industry in the war, particularly of aircraft and an awful lot of textile manufacturing as well. So the Germans just wanted to disrupt that as much as possible. So Trafford Park was actually the main target of these bombs being dropped. Surrounding areas of Stretford and Old Trafford were also badly damaged, and Manchester United's ground at Old Trafford was hit, and the damage left it out of action until 1949. Now, Marcus being the world's biggest City fan, I was like, you pipe down. But then he was like, well, actually, Kelly, City let United use their ground until it was fixed because we're actually dead nice. So I had to kind of eat a bit of humble pie at that one, but still, you know, but they did it with glee. And so many buildings in Manchester were damaged: the Cathedral, Royal Exchange, the Free Trade Hall, Piccadilly Gardens. One side of it was almost completely destroyed. And bear in mind, this wasn't the main target. This was just kind of like an afterthought kind of thing. But yeah, one side of Piccadilly Gardens was just pretty much completely destroyed. There were lots of textile factories here, so the fires, when they caught hold, were particularly bad and really hard to put out. So a lot of the buildings, actually, in the surrounding area, had to be dynamited to cause fire breaks to stop the fires from raging. And it's really sad. So just prior to this, in November, there'd actually been the Merseyside Blitz, and Liverpool was really badly damaged at the end of November. They were hit by 350 tons of bombs. And a lot of the Manchester firefighters were in Liverpool at the time, helping them, so they weren't here to help with the bombing that took place in Manchester. And overall, over these 2 nights of the Manchester Blitz, 684 people were killed as a result of the bombing, and over 2,000 more were injured. You know, really, really awful. But there was also the Oldham World War II Christmas Eve bomb. Are you aware of that? Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. So this was the Manchester Christmas Blitz 1940, but on Christmas Eve 1944, 45 V1 rockets known as doodlebugs were dropped off the Yorkshire coast of the North Sea by German Heinkel HE-111 bombers. So they flew over the North Sea, they dropped their bombs, and they were all again headed for Manchester, but luckily, I guess overall, most of them ran out of fuel, and almost half of them actually dropped in the North Sea, and the remainder of them landed, but usually quite harmlessly. But there were 15 that fell in the Greater Manchester area, so places like Bury, Salford, Didsbury, Northenden, Hyde, Worsley. They were hit. 6 people in Bury died, 1 person in Worsley died, but the greatest impact and the worst loss of life was indeed on Abbey Hills Road, next to Victoria Park. So there was a direct landing there. I hope you see this, but this is the damage. And 27 people were killed on Christmas Eve. It happened at about 5:30 in the morning on Christmas Eve. So people are asleep, everyone's in their home. 27 people killed, a further 49 injured, 35 houses were destroyed, and a further 1,100 in the area were really quite badly damaged. And so on Abbey Hills Road now, there's the 2 sides where they've got much newer housing, because obviously where it's replaced as a result of the bomb. And I didn't realise this, but in 2014, on the 70th anniversary, a commemorative plaque was put up on 145 Abbey Hills Road. So that's obviously there to see it, and it's great that it is remembered. And like I said, it's not. I'd heard of the Manchester Blitz, but I didn't know anything about the Oldham one until I started doing some research. And it's very local. It's a couple of miles away.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just that. It was Christmas Eve, 5:30 in the morning. It's heartbreaking, and just showing you the extent of the damage there. But then we'll move on to Christmas cards, shall we? We'll move on to Christmas cards. So when do you think the first Christmas card was given? Specifically, Christmas cards. I'll tell you then, shall I? So the first recorded Christmas card that we know about was given in 1611 to King James I of England, VI of Scotland. Okay, I honestly was thinking it'd be something Roman or, you know, and maybe they were, but this is the first one that we actually know about. The actual custom of sending Christmas cards originated in England. Oh yeah. Specifically in 1842, we can pinpoint it, okay, for very good reason. It wasn't necessarily because people were suddenly overcome by a desire to send festive greetings to their friends and family via the medium of the post. There was a far more prosaic reason behind it, okay? So a gentleman called Sir Henry Cole, he was a senior civil servant, and he worked at the newly formed public office, which then became the post office. And pretty much as we know it today. So prior to the post office being sent up, of course people sent letters and whatnot, but it was really expensive. You know, you either had to send it via mail coach, they always got robbed, or you could send a courier, or you could send somebody on horseback, or you could pay somebody to deliver it on foot if it was perhaps over the other side of town. But you had to have money to do it. So, you know, it wasn't a custom that many people were in the habit of doing. So, and just an aside, mail coaches at this time always had a guard, and the guard always had to have at least 2 pistols on him because of those pesky highwaymen who just had such a habit of robbing them, seriously. So when the public office, the post office, was set up, it didn't actually become an overnight sensation. The powers that be were thinking, this is amazing, everyone's going to start writing letters and sending things, but people just actually didn't really, because they weren't in the habit of doing it. So because it wasn't being so used as much as the powers that be wanted, Sir Henry Cole came up with a cunning plan to entice more custom. So he and a friend, John Worsley, was an artist. They designed a specific Christmas card in 1842, which they sold for £1, or which would sell for £1, with the express idea that you would send it in the post. Hurrah! At this time, to send a letter cost 1 penny, hello, famous penny blacks, but to send a card would only cost half a penny, so they thought, boom, this is really going to take off. But a lot of people didn't like it so much, they took offence to the Christmas cards. I mean, what do we think's offensive about that card? Bear in mind you're a Victorian and you're offended by everything. It's not the greatest of copies, but I'll tell you, it's a little child drinking wine.
Good on you.
Oh, we don't like that. Oh, children don't drink wine. So we're not buying that card. So only about 1,000 were actually sold, Victorian sensibilities being what they were. But the idea did linger, and over time, as printing processes and techniques improved, they actually began to become more popular, and by the 1860s, they were quite a thing, you know, produced in much larger numbers, and in the early 1900s, the custom started to spread from the UK out to the rest of Europe. So the first known personalised Christmas card that we know of was sent by Annie Oakley, that famous American sharpshooter. In 1891, when she was touring the world, she found herself in Glasgow for Christmas. So she had Christmas cards taken, she had a photo of herself dressed in tartan, had herself put on the front of the Christmas card and sent those back home to America. And personalised Christmas cards really are quite common now. Our card this year features our dog. Got a very festive photo of our dog. I was like, we're doing it. You know, so personalised Christmas cards definitely a thing. And a little tradition you might not be aware of that you might want to introduce, which we're definitely going to do. So the first Christmas card you receive yourself that has a picture of 3 kings on it, you need to put that on the inside of your front door, and that guarantees good luck for the following year. There we go. I actually vaguely remember that from being a kid. I've definitely heard that one before. But yeah, not everyone sends us Christmas cards. We just get emails. Or Christmas text. Okay. So, I couldn't finish this without giving you the history of the main man, Santa Claus. Often called Father Christmas, but aren't they the same jolly fat old man? As it turns out, no. They are very separate, very different origins. Okay, so we're going to delve deeper and find out. So in the 3rd century, Saint Nicholas of Myra was born. Oh, I think his mum just called him Nicholas. He was born about 280 in modern day Turkey, and he was, as these saints tend to be, a very, very pious man. He was known for his kindness, gave away all his inherited wealth to help the poor and the sick, and he had a particular fondness for helping children. And he became known as the protector of children and randomly sailors. I'm sure there's very good reason for that. And his feast day was celebrated on January 6th. This was traditionally also a lucky day to get married, or, might want to bear this in mind, a lucky day to make a large purchase. So come January 6th, I'll be on Amazon for something extremely expensive. You didn't hear that. And by the 15th century, he'd actually become, St. Nicholas, the most popular saint in Europe, particularly in Holland. They did like a bit of St. Nicholas. And in America, in the late 18th century, Dutch families began to celebrate the anniversary of his death excuse me, on the 5th or 6th of December. Saint Nicholas, Sint Nicolaas in Dutch, became known as Sinterklaas. Sint Nicolaas, Sinterklaas, and what eventually became Santa Claus. And in 1804, the first image of Sinterklaas appeared. An elderly man, lots of white hair, a beard, and wearing a red cape. This is where I hope I've got these in the right order. No? Damn it. There we go. Ignore the other one. I'll be coming back to that. I knew I'd done those in the wrong order. Okay, so you can see he's dressed in red, but he's got a red cape on. A lot of people believe that it's advertising by Coca-Cola in the 20th century that led to Santa being dressed in red. Because a lot of people think that he used to be dressed in green, but it was Coca-Cola, something to do with advertising, but that is not the case. Sinterklaas, Santa Claus, was always shown as wearing red. That is the colour of St. Nicholas. And in 1820s America, where Santa Claus really, really caught on, stores began to, that's the first place that stores advertised specific Christmas shopping. You know, and in, like, you can't go anywhere now from August onwards without jingle bells and buy this for Christmas, but it started in America in the 1820s. And in 1841, there's a shop in Philadelphia still there that claims to have had the first life-size model of Santa on display. And actually in the 1890s, the Salvation Army got unemployed men to dress in Santa suits, the now iconic red Santa suit, in New York to collect donations, and that's a tradition that continues today. And it appears in some film, I think it's Home Alone or something. And there was a poem published in 1821 that first depicted Santa riding on a reindeer sleigh, bringing presents to good children, and a long black birchen rod for the naughty ones. So nowadays, Santa, Father Christmas, more or less the same person, but Father Christmas is older. His roots are in pagan times. So in Anglo-Saxon England, the season of Yule, midwinter, was very important, but a lot of the celebrations centred around Odin, who was the head of the Germanic gods. Yule obviously kind of became Christmas when it was hijacked by Christians, and Woden, the main man of the event, was replaced by Christ. And Woden was depicted as a wise elderly man who flew through the midwinter skies on an 8-legged flying horse, spreading cheer, and he was renowned for lifting people's spirits during the bleakest time of the year. And this image remained in folk memory, even though Christianity pushed aside pagan traditions, older beliefs still remained. And by the 1600s, Woden was being referred to as Father Christmas, and by the 1700s, when he started to be sort of depicted, he was dressed in green and not red. And traditionally, Father Christmas, sorry, this is a still from the film, sort of the clearest, well, everything else was like a cartoon. But traditionally, he should always be depicted in green, carrying a staff and wearing a wreath of holly. So that's not so much an image we see nowadays, but if you see this fella, that is Father Christmas. Okay? And it explains why people think that Santa used to be dressed in green and why the urban legend says that Coca-Cola is responsible for the change to red. Santa Claus, Sinterklaas, always dressed in red. Father Christmas, the British pagan spirit of ancient midwinter, always dressed in green. And so, although they are pretty much one and the same nowadays, Santa Claus, American, Father Christmas, British, it's just nice for us, I think, to know that they are, when we say two separate men, Woden possibly didn't exist. Don't strike with a thunderclap, but you know, it's just the historic memories that we have from our past pagan times. And so that's really it for my talk. But I did just want to share and see who in this room remembers, because Roy, my font of all historical when it comes to Bardic, but Roy shared some sort of local traditions that don't really take place anymore. Christmas caroling, visiting lots of pubs. Yeah, and I'm always like, yeah, we went around the houses, we went to the farms, finished in the pubs, and then, we didn't have enough people, so we just started going to the pubs and Christmas caroling there. I was like, I like this. When are you doing it next? Well, we stopped in 1958, so I was like, damn it, a little bit late to that party. But the one I really wanted to share, the one I love, does anybody else here recall Pig Day? No? So Pig Day, this was New Year's Day, wasn't it? At the Liberal Club.
Oh, the Liberal Club, yeah.
Yeah, well basically, everyone's bought a pig and they piped the pig in to the Liberal Club. Which I was just like, that's absolutely amazing. I mean, then they killed it. And
We're all drunkards.
right, okay, fair enough.
We're all on a party. We used to go around collecting for the party and for an old folks party.
Oh, well there we go.
Yeah, before Christmas. Well, the party was for any old people in the village.
Right, so I think we definitely need to revisit this. I mean, I can live without a pig.
We used to get dressed up, collecting, going around collecting. But also we used to go to the pubs and we used to sell barbecue chickens.
Christmas barbecue chickens?
Yeah, we used to raffle them off. And what we used to do is, there were 50 pence a ticket and we used to sell 10 tickets. Well then try it.
Love it.
They'd open it up or start eating it and then somebody else would more. So we'd do like, what? A dozen, 20 chickens in the night going around the pubs. So anybody thought we're making like 4 quid a ticket.
Just piping a pig in. Have a great entrance, pig. We will be eating you shortly. Enjoy it while you can. It was lovely.
It was a very enjoyable village.
I bet it was. And then all that's left is for me to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. Thank you all so much for coming.
And if you're coming to the Santa's Christmas party next Wednesday, I guarantee that Kelly's just answered one of the quiz questions.
Oh.
So we'll be able to see who was paying attention. And I didn't write the quiz, but I'm the only person that's seen the quiz.
So I don't know which one of these answers.
No.
But I'll pretend
And remember, don't eat the berries on mistletoe.
Yeah, no, please don't. Yeah. I know I've just been telling you chapter and verse about what it's good for, okay, but seriously, I don't want to be a sad face in the Daily Mail saying I didn't mean it.
So we thank Kelly once again and we'll share her Merry Christmas too.
Yeah.
February is the next one.
Yeah.
February.
Not in January, but the first Thursday in February will be about Oldham